don't plan things out very well. I have a calendar. I have a smartphone with a calendar in it. But I still don't really plan things out to the nth degree like some others do. If there was anyone that I could stop for a moment and examine their lives and try to bring it to Moses' life and understand it, it would be Billy Graham. Now here's the reason why I say that. In the video that you saw that defined the life of Billy Graham, there were moments in there that were key moments, defining moments that made a difference in his life, that caused him to go the way that he did in his life, to the benefit of millions of people that had the opportunity to hear him speak. There was one story that was told about Billy Graham, that he was in Florida walking out at midnight, walking along the beautiful golf courses that happen to be down there. And about midnight, God impressed upon Billy Graham that he was to have a specific job that no man in and of themselves could handle by themselves. It was a job that he was supposed to go to the world and share the good news of God's love. Well, I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments in your life. Maybe we should say a burning bush moment, because that's kind of what Moses had. He had that moment where God spoke to him and said, Moses, this is what I want you to do. You notice what God said to Moses. Take your shoes off. You are on holy ground. I've never thought of a golf course being holy ground. But for Billy Graham, it was exactly that same type of moment where he was so overwhelmed with God's presence that he literally laid out on the ground prostrate before God and just said, I don't know what you have in mind, what you have in store, but here I am. Here I am. Use me. Now, for many of us, we would hear a voice at midnight while walking by ourselves, and we would immediately turn behind us to see if anybody was following us. Or we would just totally panic and start to run or hide or something. But when God presented himself to Moses or to Billy Graham, there was a moment that they absolutely knew that God was speaking to them. I've had similar moments. My moment came during the middle of a movie, a secular movie, that most people would sit there and shake their heads and say, yep, God would have to use something really weird to get through the rich. My burning bush moment was the movie Doc Hollywood. There was something in that movie that spoke to me, and God said, little town. Go to a little bitty town. Well, you don't get much smaller than Sweetburg. I think the horses and the dogs outnumbered the people. But God was saying, go. I had no idea what to expect. But I'm fortunate and glad that I had the opportunity to go. But Billy Graham had some other moments in his life. After he had enlisted or had been brought into the military as a lieutenant following his college career and his college graduation, there was a time where he was discharged from the military, and was beside himself as to what does God have in mind for me? This makes sense. But what's happened in getting me out of the service makes no sense. I thought this was it. You ever have one of those moments? I'm absolutely sure this is where God wants me. And then God pulls a 180 on you and said, no. That's not what I had in mind. What was during one of those times where Billy Graham was out walking, talking with God, and saying, what do you have in mind? And someone stepped up and suggested Youth for Christ. And then following that, someone stepped up later and said, why don't you do a crusade for Youth for Christ? We'll put it in this tent out in Los Angeles. And you'll go for a couple weeks. Well, they ended up for a couple months because the crowds were so amazing. And one thing led to another, and as Paul Harvey would say, you know the rest of the story. That's what happens when we commit ourselves to God. God will use us in ways that we never see. But yet He knows the beginning and the end of it. And He knows those crazy paths that we walk through. Whether it's mountaintops or valleys. He knows where we're walking. Trust me. I don't. I can't tell you this is your mountaintop or your valley. Heck, I don't even know for me sometimes why God has taken us through things. And it's frustrating as all get at. I want to know something more. All of that I described about Billy Graham happened before he was 30 years of age. Those of us who are double that or more think, 30? Really? Seriously? No, trust me. That when you get to Moses, you'll get into folks that are our age. Okay? Don't feel as though that, God's already passed me by 30 or 40 years. Trust me. Moses is going to set us straight in just a little bit. Moses had to wait a little bit longer. His life was saved at the beginning because his mother thought outside of the box. We talked about that last week. She was an amazing woman that thought, I have got to save my son. I have got to just come up with the most bizarre way. I can't hide him forever. I can't just throw him in the Nile and kill him like the Egyptians want us to do. So she came up with this plan. Put him in a basket and down the Nile. And we're learning about the rest of that one. But there was something about Moses. He received the training at the palace with the best teachers, the best educators, the best leaders that he could have been involved with. He was there. And he was getting the best in Egypt of all the learning that he could. And it's interesting that some of us have heard that, there are deep meanings with names. I know I love being over at the Reese's because they have the plaques on the wall with the names of their children and their children's spouses and their grandchildren on the wall and what that name means. You know what the name Moses means? It actually comes from an Egyptian word that talks about a son and talks about the unknown. If you put it together, Moses' name means the son of an unknown father. Think about that. Think about that. A son of an unknown father. Well, from the perspective of the Egyptians, from this perspective of the princess, yes. We have no idea who the father is. There is some real meaning to this name, and it makes perfect sense. But I don't know about you, but if I had the name son of the unknown father, that would kind of bother me. I don't know about you, but I'm just like, boy, that would just bust my self-esteem. I'm thinking, what does this really mean? I mean, who am I? Well, and I really think that my image of myself would be pretty low. But there's other people nowadays that have been through that. People that you know them very well. Justin Timberlake. Just raised in Tennessee. Was not involved in athletics. Was really into the music and the arts. And he was made fun of because of that. And Chris Rock. An African American in a part of New York where he was the only African American in his school. And he was picked on and bullied because of who he was. He was picked on, beat up, spit on, but yet Chris Rock calls that time in his schooling the most defining moment of his life. Becoming what he is today. Other artists, the same way. Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, were all picked on, bullied when they were kids. And now that they're in the spotlight, they are bringing their experiences to light and causing people to say, hey, let's not be doing this. Let's take a look at what really is going on. Moses had to feel a little bit of that too. I don't know. Maybe it was just Moses and Ramses and they were just being brothers. But I'm sure there was a little bit of picking on that went on there. Anybody who's been around brothers knows that. And of course, and when Ramses finds out about Moses' pedigree, or lack thereof, I'm sure the teasing got even worse. Now we talk about moments that define an individual. If I were to ask you what moments do you think define Moses' life, I'm sure that we would probably get similar answers. The burning bush, yes. The Ten Commandments on the top of the mountain, yeah. What else? I mean, there's hundreds of different things that you could look at in Moses' life. But Moses, one of the most defining moments in his life was when he went out as a representative of the Egyptian government, and he saw an Egyptian slave master beating a Hebrew slave. And he stepped in and said, no more. His real, deep down family. He could see that this is not right. This is just not right for somebody to be beating up on his slave. So he stepped in, he interfered, and ended up killing the Egyptian slave master. And then, of course, like many of us who sin, we try to cover up our sin. And so, trust me, that went, talk about burning bush, that went like wildfire through the camp. The Israelites, the Hebrew people knew what had happened. Because sure enough, the next moment, the next time that Moses intervened in a situation, what, are you going to kill me too? Really? And Moses thought he was pretty cool, pretty sly, being able to hide it all, but he didn't. Now, the beating that I just mentioned happened when Moses was 40 years old. Okay, we're getting a little closer to some of our ages, right? Was 40 years old. the confrontation later on where Moses had stood up for someone who was not in a position to stand up for themselves, that next confrontation came many years later. Where was it? It was in Exodus chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. Moses had gone out to the wilderness and just was hanging out. And he was out there by the well, and the well got, the shepherds would bring their sheep to be able to give them water. And there was a group of female shepherds. The females that were taking care of their father's sheep, and they were pushed aside, bullied away by some of the male shepherds that were there. Get out of my way, let my sheep get in here first and get their water. Moses once again says, I don't think this is so right. This isn't what should be happening. These people shouldn't be bullied just because they're women versus being men. So he stepped in again and chased the male shepherds away so that the daughters of the high priest of Midian could give water to their sheep. Well, the daughters went home, told Dad, said, man, you should have seen this. This guy just stepped in and shooed away the bullies, and we were able to do that. And what was Dad's response? Well, duh, where is he? Least we can do is thank him. Go find him. So they brought him in. One thing led to another, and Moses ends up marrying one of the daughters of this priest of Midian. Came, and it made that big of a difference in Moses' life. You want to talk about a defining moment of somebody's life? If they're married, talk about when they were married. That's defining. It's scary. Did we all know what everything would happen when we got married? When we said those vows, I do, did you really understand what that meant? Did you really understand what it meant in sickness and in health? In riches and in no riches? Did you understand that? Heck, I had no clue. I had absolutely no clue what that would lead us to. But I hang on. And I've got to trust those words were something that maybe I opened my mouth and maybe those words came out of my mouth, but I got to hope and pray that God was involved with that somewhere along the line. Or it's not going to pan out. The first moment, the moment where Moses went out and killed the Egyptian slaveholder, was at 40. His next moment that we talk about, and we know Moses about, the situation with the burning bush, happened 40 years later. Can you imagine going 40 years and not really hearing big time from God? I don't know about you, but most of us wouldn't last that long. Most of us would think, well, wait a minute, maybe God left me out here. God forgot about me. He got the first thing, and I'm going about my business here. But God forgot about me because I haven't heard from him in 39 years, 11 months, 28 days. But what happens when Moses turns 80? The burning bush. One of those stories in the Bible that most people understand, most people know, they've heard that one. But 40 years. Does that number 40 ring a bell for anybody during Lent? The 40 days of Lent? The 40 days of Lent are taken as a representation of the 40 days that Jesus spent in the wilderness being tempted by Satan. That 40 means something. It's not just, oh, that's just coincidence. What is it? in Hebrew, there is no such word as coincidence. None. That's an English thing. The language of the Jewish people. They had no idea what coincidence was. It was God was at work. And that's how they defined what we now call coincidence. You know, there was a lot that went on in Moses' life. The confrontation with the shepherds. He got married. He had children. He took on the role of a shepherd. And then the burning bush. Moses encountered a bush burning in the desert. There was minimal water. It was dry. If you have ever been in the desert, you know if you see something on fire, it will be consumed quickly because the moisture there is minimal. But this bush didn't just burn into ash. This bush kept on burning. And then we hear in Exodus chapter 3, verses 6, 7, and 8. Then he said, this is God speaking, I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And when Moses heard this, he hid his eyes. He thought, I can look at a lot of things in my life, but I can't look on the face of God, and I'm covering my eyes. I'm sure he kind of pulled his head down. If he would have had a hat on, the brim would have been over his eyes as well. He hid his eyes. This is what he felt he needed to do. And he continued to be in that situation where he understood the respect of Almighty God. Now, if you take the 40 years where he went out and saw the Egyptian slave master beating up the slave, and you take the next 40 years before God appeared to him as a burning bush, that means some of us we're yet to see the big number 2. The second time God's going to intervene. And this shows me one thing, that when we hit 80, God ain't finished with us. Which is encouraging. It's encouraging for those of us in our 60s. It's encouraging that God's not done with me yet. God is going to continue to reveal new things to me. Continue to use me in a way that will make a difference in the lives of people. I have to believe that. And this story gives me that encouragement. It gives me that hope. But all along, Moses was reluctant. Let's go back to chapter 3. He was reluctant. He said this, verse 11. When Moses had grown up, he went to visit the people, the Israelites, and saw how hard they were working. During the visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of the Hebrew slaves, and after looking around to make sure no one was watching, ever done that? All of a sudden, wait a minute, we're not talking your granddaughter, no. No, she wouldn't do that. But I mean, there's something about it. Oh my goodness, we've got a situation going on here. And then the next day while Moses was out visiting, he saw 2 Hebrews fighting, and they said, why are you treating your neighbor like that? He said, what are you going to do, kill us both? You know, that comes back to haunt him as well. And there were time and time again where Moses had to understand what was going on. Chapter 4. Moses protested again to God. Look, they won't believe me. They won't do what I tell them. Well, duh. The only experience that the Hebrew people had with Moses was Moses losing his temper and whooping up on somebody. Of course they're not going to believe. Of course. And then verse 10 in chapter 4, Moses pleaded with the Lord, "Oh Lord, I am not a good speaker. I never have been. I'm not now, and even after you have spoken the words to me. I'm clumsy with words." Really? This guy had the best training in Egypt? And he said, I can't talk. Really? You had the best? And now you're going to play that dumb card with me? You're going to play that card, I can't speak properly? You're going to play that with me? Moses, ain't going to work. And then Moses pleaded with God. He did it again. He just said, I can't do it. And then who makes the mouths? God said in response to Moses. You know, I do it. I question God. But I never expected God to come back and use the argument that I gave against me. Hey, Moses, who makes the mouths? Who makes people so they can speak or not to speak, hear or not hear, see or not see? Isn't it me? Says the Lord. Aren't I the one who does all that? Pay attention. Listen up, boy. You're the one. I picked you. There ain't no getting out of it. Come on. And then continues on. Moses said, Lord, please send someone else. Love the way you see that now in the writing. Lord, period. Please, period. Send, period. Someone, period. Else, period. It's like to make that emphasis that it's like, ain't no way. Don't be doing this to me. God says, look, Moses, I didn't pick you because you were fluent in everything, because you knew how to argue with the Almighty. And that's not the reason why I picked you. I picked you because you are the one that's going to be able to do all these things and bring my people out of slavery. I wonder how many times we're like that. Are we like that? How many times do we get to the point where we say, God, nope, you got the wrong dude. You're supposed to go to the guy next door. You just missed the house number. I didn't put it on the front of the house big enough. This is not, no, you're supposed to go to 210 Buckley Street, not 216 Buckley Street. Go there. Don't talk. No, it's not me. And God's saying, man, you're missing it. I chose you. And I have equipped you for doing what I've called you to do. Don't give me the excuse you're too young. Don't give me the excuse that you're too old. Don't give me the excuse that you're too shy. Don't give me the excuse that you're unprepared. Just say, okay, God, I don't get it. I don't know why you picked me. There's plenty of other people, but here I am. That's where we come. That's where we're coming in our lives. God, here I am. Do whatever you got to do with me. Make a difference in the world around me because of me. I don't know what that looks like for everybody. Heck, I'm having a tough time figuring out what that means and what that looks like for me. I think I know. I think I try to practice that, but it's tough. But God is just saying, Lord, here I am. Use me, send me. Do with me whatever you want to do. But just here I am. It worked for Moses. Eventually, when he said that, it worked for Billy Graham. And I'm not trying to put you in the same category with those two men, but it works for you too. Here I am, Lord. Send me. Let's pray. Father, thanks for your word that makes it clear that no matter what our qualifications, what characteristics we have or don't have, you have called us for a specific purpose. And when you call us so we can hear from you. And that we will realize that we too are standing on holy ground. When you speak to us, Lord, here I am. Here we are. Send us. In Christ's name. Amen.